The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 23. What Happened at the Banquet. Part 1. Around the time when Kevin's training was getting more intense, Baron Romero officially announced something that shook the entire area around Dimitri. The marriage between Dimitri and Lawrence has been broken. The breakup, people knew what it meant. It meant that Dimitri's protection could no longer be counted on to resolve the conflict with Barco, leaving Lawrence to prepare for war by themselves. In such a situation, naturally, people started gossiping. Baron Romero had announced that the Lawrence family's irresponsible attitude was the reason for the breakup, but the public's interpretation was different. The reason for the breakup? Obviously, the flower of Lawrence decided to marry for the sake of her family, but when she experienced Dimitri's fool firsthand, she couldn't stand it anymore. Other than that, why would Lawrence demand a breakup? Even though Barco's blade was reaching the front of her family's neck, the fact that she still made such a decision means that Dimitri's fool was worse than the rumors. No way. Making that decision even if the family is destroyed? But what about the rumors that Dimitri's eldest son subjugated the Blood Fong? Do you seriously believe those rumors? There's no way someone who's been called Dimitri's fool for decades could subjugate Blood Fong out of the blue. He probably pulled some strings to improve his reputation to avoid a breakup. It's not that the new Roman Dimitri wasn't enough, but Lawrence demanded a divorce because he wasn't up to their expectations. That was the public opinion. Roman's reputation was terrible. He had lived his whole life as a fool, while Flora Lawrence was praised as the flower of Lawrence. With one incident, he had achieved a different reputation from his past. However, the people had seen Roman Dimitri's irresponsible actions over the years, and although his reputation was improved by the subjugation of the Blood Fong, the people's view of him could not be changed entirely. Nevertheless, the Dimitri family did not take any action. The Baron knew that it was not something that could be changed even if one were to use every word in the dictionary, and it was an undeniable reality that Roman Dimitri had lived his past life like a fool. However, he trusted the changed Roman. He was completely different from the rumors, so the Baron was able to laugh at people's reactions and continue his work without minding them. In such a situation, the bright day for Barco's banquet came. Is this really what I'm meant to wear? Roman's expression hardened, and his eyes trembled. He looked tired of the clothes that caught his eye, luxurious and decorated with gold thread splendidly. Hans said, "Young master, this is your first public appearance after the breakup with Lawrence. The status of the young master and the Dimitri family is on the line, so you can't just wear any clothes. By the way, to explain this garment, it is the work of Pierre, a craftsman working in the northeast area, and we spent a lot of money to get rid of the waiting time due to dozens of people ordering from him and to have him make this one-of-a-kind outfit to your measurements." The man was not driven solely by money, so it took quite a while to convince him even though we carried a lump of money. But now, are you saying you won't wear this masterpiece created through blood and sweat? 2 weeks ago, shortly after Roman announced his intention to attend the banquet, Hans started to go and look for clothes for Roman every day. He even checked the fabric and if the color would suit Roman's tastes. Seeing Hans contact famous artisans for him, he again realized how unusual Hans' dedication was. Regardless, seeing his assertive attitude that seemed as if it wouldn't tolerate rejection, Roman had no choice but to smile and nod. "I get it. I'll wear it." In the past, people often thought of the devil when they heard the word heavenly demon. They believed him to be a monster that had neither blood nor tears, and someone who would cut off their heads at once even if they asked to be his prisoner. In fact, when he was on his way to reaching the peak of his martial arts, there were many instances when he would be forced to condemn his subordinates. However, Roman never ignored the devotion of his subordinates. And Hans was a man who showed his devotion to him thoroughly. Although the Dimitri family grants him daily bread and salary, he has a sincere heart for Roman. That's why he even went ahead and searched for the best craftsmen and asked them to make clothes for Roman. However, what was the reason behind those actions? Honestly, Hans didn't want material rewards, he just hoped that Roman would happily accept the clothes he brought for him. Roman smiled, just because it was a particularly effortless action. Even though the colorful clothes looked burdensome to him, he showed a smiling face to Hans while struggling to hide his hardened expression. Just looking at it makes me choke on my breath, but if the rules of this world are like this, then I need to follow them. When someone stays in the kingdom, they often hear a saying that they must obey the kingdom's laws. And now was the time for Roman to adapt to them, just as he had adapted to reality as a child by following instructions that came from above in a dark cavern. Now, Roman clearly knew when to take the lead and when he had to follow the existing standard. He decided to wear the fancy clothes. It meant accepting reality, and also meant Roman was adjusting to the new world. It took him quite some time to change into them. Regardless, Hans' eyes suddenly turned into hearts when he finally saw Roman come out with the changed clothes. It's really, really cool. The clothes were a combination of black and gold. In the golden light that bloomed on a serious and charismatic black background, Roman looked like a nobleman with a high reputation. At that moment, Hans became sure the main character of Barco's Banquet would be his young master, Roman Dimitri. Chris and Kevin, they were the two people who would accompany Roman to the banquet. Due to the fact that they were following him as his escorts, they were armed differently than usual. Clack clack. The rustling of the armor resounded loudly. As Chris was in the knight uniform, he wore a custom-made armor. The armor, which was silver, adequately fitted to his body and shimmered in the sun. Also, his golden hair was fluttering gracefully in the wind. That figure proved why Chris was called a handsome swordsman. His posture and appearance right now were just confident and gorgeous. Glance. He looked at the sword hanging from his waist. A sword of a suitable length so as not to touch the ground was engraved with a pattern symbolizing Dimitri. Why is he so late? Kevin hadn't come out yet. As it was typical that the escorts should finish their preparations before their master, Chris showed a slight dissatisfaction at Kevin's delay. Just then, from afar, a silhouette of a dwarf stature jumped out. Clack clack. Sorry. It was Kevin. And his look was the exact opposite of Chris. As it was only recently decided that he would be the second escort, custom armor couldn't be made for him, who was only a commoner. Moreover, due to him being in his mid-teens, an armor that could fit him couldn't be found either. So he just put on armor that matched the size of the blacksmith. The problem was that even that was too big for Kevin, and Chris couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation, seeing a helmet big enough to cover most of Kevin's sweaty forehead. I have to escort Roman with this guy. Kevin, he was just like a boy soldier. Even if you ignored his sloppy appearance and ignorance of the etiquettes of escorts, Kevin couldn't even hold his center properly in his armor. The day the two fought each other, Chris didn't like Kevin's tenacity. It was not that he didn't understand Kevin's plight, but his ignorance of Chris's training and devotion to his sword sparked something inside him. Was that why? Seeing Kevin grabbing the helmet that kept dropping down, Chris said sharply, "We are the Lord's escort and the face of Dimitri. Whatever happens outside, don't act hastily. The young master's reputation depends on our actions as well, so we should be especially careful with our words and actions." The last duel. Because of that, Chris decided to sincerely follow Roman. Back in the day, I wouldn't care Dimitri's fool or whatever he was known as, but now I can't afford to see Roman being ignored or disrespected. He's my own master. Roman Dimitri's reputation would soon be that of his own, so he knew that from now on, he had to be extra careful with his words and deeds, just for the sake of his master. On the other hand, Kevin was worried. As he didn't know anything about a knight's etiquette, he might make a mistake at a banquet where etiquette is extremely important. That was why Kevin nodded his head seriously after hearing Chris' words. "I'll keep that in mind, Sir Knight." "Great." A smile appeared on Chris' face when he was called by the title of knight. He and Kevin were in the same position, but Kevin still called Chris knight, probably because it was difficult for him to evaluate himself on the same level as Chris. Maybe it was because he was a little relieved now? Chris suddenly walked over to Kevin and fixed the crooked helmet. And the time has arrived. Seeing Roman come out, Chris and Kevin packed their things. It was time to leave for Barco's banquet. The hottest topic of discussion at the banquet was that Lawrence's flower and Dimitri's eldest son, both of the young nobles who broke off their engagement, would be attending the banquet. The banquet had already started. And seeing that Roman Dimitri had not yet appeared, a drunken nobleman at the banquet said to the man standing next to him, "What the hell is that guy, Roman, thinking?" Even though he knew that Barco's eldest son wanted Flora, he insisted on an arranged marriage, then abruptly cancelled the engagement and announced his intention to attend Barco's party. That's exactly why he's called a fool. He would have chosen one of the two things if he was a smart guy. I guess. It is common sense to either fight against Barco by pushing the arranged marriage to the end or to turn away from Lawrence for the sake of a smooth relationship with Barco in the first place. Because of Roman Dimitri's actions, the Dimitri family's position has become really ambiguous now. They are indeed a dominant force in the northeast region, but marrying Lawrence and trying to maintain a good relationship with Barco in the future is just too greedy and unrealistic. And they say Roman Dimitri is coming to the banquet to make up for his mistakes. What a funny guy, ha ha ha. The nobles laughed. Roman was an object of ridicule for them. He was now known as the guy who ignored the relationship between the families and behaved as he wished, but was eventually abandoned due to the breakup of his marriage with Flora. It was obvious why he was coming to the banquet, abandoned by both sides. He seemed to be trying to restore his relationship with Barco now. All over the banquet, conversations on the topic of Roman blossomed. Most of them were people who had experienced Roman by meeting him themselves, so there was no hesitation in remarks that demeaned Roman at the banquet. Even among an aristocratic crowd, Roman's reputation was low. Dimitri's name prevented him from being ignored while in front of them, but they couldn't help but gossip behind his back. In that situation, a noblewoman who didn't know about him asked, "Who is Roman Dimitri?" "You will see it for yourself. He has a dirty look and a small physique, so he's not a good-looking guy. By the way, he is so pretentious only because he is Dimitri's eldest son. He always had a bad reputation from the beginning among the nobility. To put it bluntly, if I were Flora Lawrence, I would have objected to marrying him, even if I had to bite my own tongue. Is he that bad? Would he be called Dimitri's fool for no reason? Only a lit chimney has smoke, after all. Once he drinks alcohol, he will naturally reveal who he really is." Just then, when the party is about to ripen more, Barco's servant announced with a deep voice, "Roman Dimitri, the eldest son of the Dimitri family, has arrived." Roman. Hearing that name, the attention of the people, who had been gossiping about him until now, was simultaneously focused on a single place. And at that place, the door opened, and Roman entered the banquet hall. Chapter 24. What happened at the banquet? Part 2. Most nobles attending the banquet had already experienced Roman's true nature. He often appeared at banquets while hanging out with Anthony, and those who watched him always thought how pathetic he was while doing drunken acts with his face flushed red. Therefore, the nobles naturally saw the scars and weaknesses of Roman. They didn't know the reason for the breakup. So, they thought Flora had broken up due to seeing how he behaved at banquets and couldn't see him positively anymore. However, everyone held their breath when Roman appeared at the banquet today. He seemed to be truly representing Dimitri's title, unlike in the past, and people saw a different person from the Roman they knew. Is that seriously Roman Dimitri? How is he so different from before? In their memories, Roman was a man who wasn't even good-looking. His not-so-tall stature made him look even smaller due to his small physique, and his dirty skin ultimately destroyed Roman's image. Moreover, even his gait was terrible. Knowing that Dimitri's second son was different from Roman, rumors circulated that Roman was an illegitimate child and could not hide his vulgarity. But now, Roman was utterly different from the past. His gait was calm, and his broad shoulders and muscles that could not be hidden even with clothes were visible to everyone. Moreover, his skin was as white as milk. In the past, his face had many problems, so his eyes didn't show any charm, but now, his black eyes and red lips seemed to highlight his milk-white skin and make him look even more handsome. And finally, everyone noticed the gorgeous clothes, which exuded the aura of a dragon. The clothes having gold thread on a black background emphasized Roman's charisma to the fullest. Murmur murmur. Did Roman really look like this? Absolutely not. In the past, he was definitely shorter than me, but now, even at a single glance, I can see the difference in our height. The nobles murmured. In the past, Roman often tried hard to decorate himself and win people's hearts, but he could not create an atmosphere remotely resembling the current one. It wasn't just a difference in appearance, it was the difference in the atmosphere and aura that people have accumulated over the course of their lives. And the frivolity of the life of Roman, who could not achieve anything, was now changed, even fundamentally. Roman and Baek Jung-hyuk, the two had lived completely different lives. Baek Jung-hyuk, who stood at the apex of Murim and looked down on everyone else, had the power to catch others' focus with his appearance alone. A person's appearance is an extremely important factor in their life. As proof of that, initially, everyone was planning to stay away from Roman, but seeing the change made people want to talk to him at least once. Was that why? Some nobles started to approach Roman. The first noble to approach him was a woman. After asking other nobles about Roman and hearing the bad rumors, she couldn't contain her curiosity given that he was so different from his reputation. It is an honor to meet you. I am Sophia of the Grizel family. Tap. Roman stopped walking. As his calm, sunken eyes turned to Sophia, Sophia said with a slightly blushed face, "You are probably not familiar with the Grizel family name. My father, Baron Grizel, followed in the footsteps of our ancestors that have dedicated themselves to the kingdom of Cairo from generation to generation. It's not a great family, but it doesn't have a bad history." Sophia was the daughter of a lower aristocrat. He had settled in a small land on the outskirts, and his position in the kingdom was so low that most people did not know that the family named Grizel had passed down the Baron title from generation to generation. Still, the reason she was able to attend the Barco family's banquet was because Sophia was beautiful. Her beautiful appearance and the condition of being a noblewoman were enough for her to receive Anthony Barco's invitation. Was that why Sophia needed to describe her family? The fact that she came from a lower aristocracy lowered her self-esteem and status, so she needed to explain herself to whomever she met. On the contrary, Barco and Dimitri were different. There was no need for them to talk about their family history to whomever they met. Not knowing their names in the northeast area of the Kingdom of Cairo was the same as not having the qualifications to be a noble. Just then, Roman spoke, "I know the Grizel family well. As a nobleman of Cairo, there is no way for me to not know the name of a family with a history of more than 100 years. Do you really know about the Grizel family?" Hearing Roman's words, Sophia's eyes widened. She initially just wanted to have a normal conversation with Roman, but she didn't think that Roman would know about the Grizel family. Is he just pretending to know? Doubts naturally arose in her mind. Not recognizing a noble family was an act of rudeness, so occasionally, people would pretend to know even if they didn't know. She thought Roman was the same. Otherwise, how would he know the Grizel family, who had never made a name for themselves outside the outskirts? But I once heard my father talk about the Grizel family. They are a family that has established their home in the northeast area for many years, and the wood they produce is famous for its excellent quality in the whole kingdom of Cairo. And isn't the pattern of the family also a giant tree with wide branches? I heard your brother recently succeeded in mana sensitivity, and I sincerely congratulate him on his achievement. Ah. Hearing those words, Sophia's doubts were dispelled. Now, she was sure, Roman truly knew about the Grizel family, and she didn't need to explain herself further to him. He's brilliant and knowledgeable. The mere fact that Roman recognized the Grizel family made Sophia think so. Maybe Roman Dmitri is a greater man than the rumors make him out to be. Hearing Roman's first conversation at the banquet, people's eyes widened as if they had seen something unbelievable. 2 weeks earlier, announcing his intention to attend the banquet, Roman made an unusual request to Hans. Hans, when you're free, bring me all the information we have about the families located in the northeast. It should definitely contain what kind of families there are in the northeast area of the Kingdom of Cairo, what the pattern of that family is, and what has happened recently in their estates. To attend a banquet, I need to at least know the background of the people I will be meeting. It was an unexpected request. However, Hans did not ask questions, just as usual, and brought all available information from the surrounding area to Roman, as per Roman's request. Whenever he had the time, Roman read through the information Hans had brought him. It was definitely annoying to learn the patterns of a family he hadn't even heard of and to read information about people he had never met. Nevertheless, Roman knew that this was necessary. I am not a commoner. I will be attending Barco's banquet as the eldest son of Dmitri, on behalf of the family. So I need to have the minimum amount of courtesy. What kind of family the people I will meet will belong to, and how has that family been from older generations? As I am considered to be Dmitri's fool, it will take a lot of effort to win other people's hearts. Before he reached the peak of the demonic cult, Baek Jung-hyuk studied the role of a ruler. In the world of survival of the fittest, strength was the #1 value, but experience had shown him how important it was to remember names, not only initially but also when maintaining the relationship. Thousands, tens of thousands of servants, when he called out their names, even though he had never talked much with them, they gave their lives for Baek Jung-hyuk. How funny. Just because he remembered their names, people shouted Baek Jung-hyuk's name and said it was worth giving their life for him. Relationships between people start with the smallest things. People who know me as Dmitri's fool will be prejudiced from the start, but if I remember and recognize their names, their attitude will definitely change. In order to get people's attention, I need to give them attention first, and since I have decided to live as Roman Dmitri, I need to put a lot of effort into it. Sophia Grizel, Roman hadn't ever seen her. However, when she spoke to him and identified herself as Grizel, Roman remembered everything about her. The Grizel family. Their patterns, their history, and all the big things that happened in their estate recently, Roman remembered it all. Eventually, seeing the friendly atmosphere between Roman and Sophia, nobles who had hesitated earlier began to flock to Roman. The banquet suddenly got noisy. And at the center of it all was, of course, Roman. It's lovely to meet the eldest son of the Bolt family. Of course, I know the Bolt family well. Didn't Viscount Bolt go to the battlefield and make great contributions in the past? As I read the events of that time in a book, I thought that later on, I would have to prove myself on the battlefield just like Viscount Bolt. Is your mother doing well? I recently heard rumors that she has a chronic illness, and the colder the weather, the more she needs to take care of her health. Was it 10 years ago? The deal with the Heroes family netted Dmitri a significant profit. My father always told me how caring the Heroes family was, so I am also very grateful to the Heroes family. Roman, he was the pinnacle of the demonic cult, and at one time, he had established undisputed control along with power. People often said that it was thanks to his mighty strength, but the wise ones knew that it wasn't simply because of his strength. Those who were in power also needed to follow social norms, and Roman knew the importance of socializing. Simply remembering the other person and creating an environment in which the other person can speak freely is often extremely hard, even for leaders. However, at Barco's banquet, the situation was going differently than anyone would have thought. At first, everyone thought that Dmitri's fool, as usual, would be bullied, but the nobles flocked to him once they saw his changed appearance and someone who knew of their achievements and praised them. Those who did not know Roman earlier now had a crush on him, and those who knew him earlier saw the fact that Roman had changed. Roman's reputation as Dmitri's fool had been solidified over decades. Nevertheless, today, he, who should have been ignored by others due to his breakup, melted the atmosphere with his few noble words. A certain noble said, "It seems that I misjudged you all this time, Roman. You were always drunk, so I thought it would be hard to have a conversation without alcohol, but I didn't expect it to be so much fun and hilarious. I hope that the Bolt family and Dmitri family will continue to maintain a good relationship in the future as well. The Bolt family, because Roman complimented his father once, he was in a good mood, and he smiled briskly with a blushing face. Ironically, the atmosphere was reversed and the complete opposite of what anyone had expected. Now, no one hated Roman. Moreover, the people who were recently bad-mouthing him were also now sneaking up to him and laughing and chatting together. The Dmitri family, they were the absolute powerhouse in the northeast area. Nevertheless, people never treated Roman well, even though he was a Dmitri. The reason for that was that even though he was the eldest son, the chances of him inheriting the family were extremely slim, and the person himself was light and frivolous. That was why most people tried to avoid him. However, now, it was different. Roman had not only changed in appearance, but he also knew how to deal with people while inducing a friendly atmosphere. All of this led to people finally realizing Roman's position, although a bit late. Roman was Dmitri's eldest son. If he was actually a decent guy, there was nothing wrong with being friendly to him. Just then, passing through the crowd, Barco's servant approached Roman and said, "Roman, the Barco family's young master has invited you to his private room." The servant was talking about his young master. Of course, it had to be him, Anthony Barco. After getting the invitation for the meeting he had been waiting for, Roman asked the aristocrats around him for forgiveness and said to Barco's servant, "Guide me to his room." From this point onwards, it was his turn to find out the truth about Roman, which he had been wondering about. Chapter 25. What happened at the banquet? Part 3. Anthony Barco's impression was more natural than Roman had expected. When he saw Roman looking completely different than before, his eyes widened, and he trembled. "Roman! What the hell happened?" He had heard that Roman had changed through his servants just a while ago. However, he could never have imagined, even in his wildest dreams, that the change would be this dramatic. Thus, he looked at Roman with a genuinely surprised look. Roman said, "I don't understand it myself. When I lavishly used a lot of money to care for my appearance, nothing changed, but now it suddenly changed. Anyway, nice to see you after a long time." Roman had said that casually, in a light and frivolous tone. It was mainly due to Hans' advice, who had been observing his relationship with Anthony Barco. "It's just me and Anthony Barco in this room." Roman looked around and took note of his surroundings. He noticed that Anthony Barco, who was enjoying the banquet with other noblewomen until recently, sent them all away when he heard that Roman had arrived. That was likely why the tabletop was really messed up. Not only were there so many bottles of wine lying around, but Roman also saw things he presumed to be women's underwear. Due to that, he could easily guess what kind of person Anthony Barco was and how he played in his private room under the pretext of a banquet. Nevertheless, Roman kept that to himself. As he had often dealt with the cunning squirrels of the demonic cult, he knew that a just approach wasn't always the best method for dealing with such people. Anthony Barco sent all the nobles out of the private room when his servant said I was here. That meant that what Anthony Barco would talk about were secrets someone else should never hear. And, I need to act at least a bit drunk to hear them. He laughed. While hoping that Anthony Barco remembered Roman, he drank a glass as soon as he sat down on the chair. Tap. Ah, that's good. The alcohol that passed through his esophagus was suddenly eradicated. Contrary to his appearance, Roman was actually waiting for Anthony Barco to speak. He kept his calm, subdued eyes focused on him. Anthony Barco, I don't have enough information about him. Through Hans, he understood how they usually acted with each other, but there was no way to find out the secret relationship between the two. That was why he kept his mouth shut. By waiting quietly, he was indirectly inducing his enemy to speak first. All right. Anthony Barco eventually opened his mouth. It's nice to see you after a long time. I guess I can take it positively. In fact, even back then, I really wondered what your intentions were. When you, who ignored our close friendship, told me you were going to marry Lawrence while we were in this private room. Ha. Honestly, no matter how secretive the banquet was, I didn't think you would be like that. The banquet and the bed inside the private room, in a situation where fragments of the truth popped out of his mouth, Anthony Barco continued humorously, "So, does you attending this banquet mean that you accepted my offer?" "No, since you already proved your will by breaking the marriage with Lawrence in the first place, I don't think I even need to ask for an answer. We'll keep it a secret, so let's discuss the marriage between Barco and Dimitri." The marriage with Barco. As soon as the keyword was mentioned, Roman's mind suddenly removed a lock from something. Clack. And with that, he accessed the original Roman Dimitri's memories and was able to remember the past. On that day, Roman was very nervous about attending Barco's banquet. "Come on, Roman Dimitri. Don't be too nervous. Even though you betrayed Anthony Barco and accepted an arranged marriage with Lawrence, you can't just avoid them forever, can you? So, let's take this opportunity to get our relationship back to where it was." After hesitating countless times about accepting Barco's invitation, he finally decided to meet Anthony in person to solve the problem. The enemy was Barco. Nevertheless, he wanted to solve the problem as much as possible by talking, as he didn't want to wage war with them because of his petty desires. Naturally, his father had turned completely hostile to Barco from the time he accepted an arranged marriage with Lawrence. However, Roman Dimitri felt in his young heart that there were still chances of the problems being solved through discussion. And due to that, Roman went to the banquet. Unexpectedly, Anthony Barco welcomed Roman naturally, and as he relaxed, he drank a lot of alcohol without realizing it. And that was the true problem. His consciousness had ended there. He couldn't remember anything after that. Later, when he woke up holding his head as if it would split due to the hangover, an utterly unfamiliar scene unfolded before his eyes. On the bed in the private room, there were women whose faces he had never seen before. Roman was startled and ran outside, and Anthony Barco caught him. From that point onwards, Roman's life plummeted. Anthony Barco and Roman were usually promiscuous, so he thought Anthony would just let it pass, but he said with a face so ferocious it seemed as if he would eat Roman in a heartbeat, "Roman, I'm not going to say anything about the fact that you, who are about to get married by arrangement, are promiscuous with women. But now, do you know who you're messing with? One of the women you were with was named Emily Barco. It wasn't enough that you betrayed me by agreeing to marry Lawrence, but now you even dare to touch Barco's woman?" Emily Barco was Barco's collateral. And, from that day onward, Anthony Barco often threatened Roman by using that fact as an excuse. Choose right now. Should I expose this fact and end your marriage, or will you re-establish our relationship by marrying a direct descendant of our family? I still feel anger at what you did, but if you become Barco's man, I intend to contain my anger and forgive you. Roman, naturally, was in despair. He locked himself in his room as soon as he returned from the banquet and shouted at Hans to bring him a drink. It was a painful day for him. He was given two options, and both of them were the worst. If the marriage with Lawrence was broken for touching Barco's collateral, Dimitri's honor would fall to the ground. Even then, Roman Dimitri, who knew that he had a reputation as a fool, wouldn't be able to bear the wrath of his father, Baron Romero, for what had happened. Nevertheless, Roman could not choose the other option either. He truly loved Flora. He was completely obsessed with her since the first day he saw her, and he asked his father, even though he knew what their family would have to pay dearly for it, for an arranged marriage with Flora. And he could not go to Flora and ask for a breakup, as that would mean he would inflict the disgrace of being a divorced woman on the woman he truly loved. He couldn't tolerate it anymore. He was in dire trouble. Anthony Barco was sending him letters from time to pressure him, and eventually, the decisive moment came. That day, Roman committed suicide. He was definitely a weak human, a human who had not accomplished anything properly by his own strength and had no confidence to solve his own problems. Therefore, he believed that if he died, all problems would be solved naturally. The death of the firstborn, that would be a big disgrace to the Dimitri family. However, it would still be better than being unilaterally divorced because of her son's promiscuous behavior. He also thought that bereavement would still be a much better option for Flora Lawrence rather than being labeled a divorced woman. Yes, it was pathetic. At the memories of the past, Roman showed a disappointing smile. It was an unfortunate reality. Roman's reason for suicide wasn't that great. Barco performed tricks that are common in politics, and Roman, a weak human being, gave up his life due to his fear of his father's wrath and his sincerity towards Flora. If only Roman had trusted his father and told him about it, Baron Romero would never have allowed his son to make the extreme choice of suicide. But Roman didn't know how much his father loved him. So, he chose the burden of taking pills and committing suicide. Eventually, he came back to reality. When he looked ahead, he saw Anthony Barco happily waiting for Roman's answer. When he had first heard the news of Dimitri's breakup, Anthony Barco was on cloud nine. "You idiot. You really went and committed suicide over something you couldn't even remember." Roman's memory was utterly different from the truth. It was true that he woke up on the same bed Emily and the other women were on in the private room. However, Roman hadn't even touched them in the slightest. Of course, Anthony thought they would do it for real. He thought the job would be easy for Roman, who usually led a promiscuous life, but Roman's reaction was completely out of his expectations. "I'm sorry, but I'm about to get married. Thus, I have no intention of hanging out with other women in the future." Anthony Barco's face was completely twisted when he heard him saying that Roman would not have any other romantic relationships with others now. It was utterly out of his expectations. So, he planned. He made Roman get drunk and persuaded his powerless friend to believe he had slept with others. For Roman, it was something he had no choice but to be defeated at. He didn't know anyone who wasn't promiscuous in the first place, but since he was also promiscuous, he firmly believed it was his fault. And thus, Barco succeeded in threatening Roman. As planned, Roman chose to break up with Flora, and Anthony Barco knew what the finale would be now. Now the Lawrence family is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Still, they will fight to the end to protect their humble pride. What if Barco and Dimitri get married by arrangement in this situation? The game is totally over for them. No force can withstand Barco and Dimitri's combined power in the Northeast area because they're the powerhouses of the Northeast. It's perfect now. Anthony Barco, who swallowed a laugh inwardly, spit out an eloquent discourse towards his puppet, Roman. The combination of Barco and Dimitri is a huge topic that will send all of Northeast into an uproar. No one will be able to surpass our stronghold, and you will also be able to claim unparalleled power in the Northeast area. Also, as you know, my sister, whom you will marry, is a beauty whom everyone recognizes. For you, it's an offer you have no reason to turn down. It was really sweet. It was a proposal that any man would be deceived by, and Anthony Barco thought that someone like Roman would, of course, accept it. Nevertheless, Roman's reaction was, once again, out of his expectations. "I don't think I need to accept the arranged marriage for that reason alone." "What?" Anthony Barco's expression suddenly hardened. He thought he had heard something wrong for a moment, so he reminded him again, "You seem to have misunderstood, but this is not something you can reject. If you reject Barco's offer, I will have no choice but to disclose what happened on this bed right here to the entire world. And then, what will be the status of Dimitri? You broke up with Lawrence, but people probably think the reason for the breakup is because you love other girls. So, think carefully, if you want to walk with your head lifted in the future." It was an undeniable threat. Nevertheless, even while facing Anthony Barco's ferocious face, Roman smiled timidly without the slightest bit of agitation. He then crossed his legs and looked straight at Anthony Barco. A few days ago, Roman had investigated the Barco family, what kind of place it was and how strong they were. And he also made a decision. I just said it. For that petty reason, Dimitri does not need to accept Barco's offer. The Northeast area, the strongest powerhouse in that land was Dimitri, not Barco. Chapter 26. What happened at the banquet? Part 4. Anthony Barco was speechless. He was not at all concerned about something like this when he was told that Roman would be attending the banquet. It was, of course, natural. Back then, Roman's breakup was just announced. It meant that his threat worked, and he was holding the sword, or at least, that's what he believed. Roman, from now on, it will be better if you think carefully about each word before saying anything. You didn't just have a promiscuous time with other women ahead of your arranged marriage, you touched Barco's woman. That means you have to join the Barco family. I allowed you to marry not just anyone but a direct descendant rather than using them as collateral. That was my last consideration because of my relationship with you. But just now, did you dare say for that petty reason in front of me? His voice noticeably swelled with anger. As if his anger could never naturally subside, he drank wine from a bottle and spoke savagely, "Hey. I am different from you. You are Dimitri's disgrace who was pushed out of the succession, but I am the heir who will inherit everything from Barco. Taking Lawrence's flower that I wanted wasn't enough for you? Do you think you'll be fine after touching Barco's woman? You are making an irreversible mistake right now." His attitude had changed. His close friend vanished, and Anthony Barco, the successor of Barco, pushed the sword he was holding to Roman's throat. He thought that as he had said this much, if it was the Roman he remembered, he would bow down with his eyes closed and ask for mercy. However, Roman smiled rather coldly and said, "Do whatever you feel like." The opponent's weapon was not a real sword. Roman did not waver at his words, which was something that Anthony couldn't have imagined even in his wildest dreams. "I'm known as Dimitri's fool anyway. As I am already treated like garbage, even if you add the rumors of touching several women even though I accepted the arranged marriage, it won't change anything. Alas, as you said, Dimitri's honor will be tarnished. But, it was originally like that, wasn't it? This bastard. Anthony, you should act in moderation." The Barco family had a misunderstanding. Although they were a powerhouse in the Northeast region, their power didn't come from their own authority, it was solely due to their connections with the central government. Nevertheless, power from connections could never allow them to succeed Dimitri in terms of influence in the Northeast region of Cairo. Roman continued, "You should also know that the reason I chose to break up is not because of your threats. I myself decided that the marriage with Lawrence was not necessary, so I made the decision to cancel the wedding despite the criticism from those around me. This enabled you to achieve what you wanted as well. Now that Dimitri has turned their back on Lawrence, Barco's plans for the future will surely be much easier. But now, as you, Barco's eldest son, show your teeth to me, I wonder, what should I do? Wouldn't it be possible for me to help Lawrence and interfere with Barco, even if that's just for settling my personal resentment?" At that moment, Anthony Barco felt his heart simmer down as if it had been plunged into an ice bath. After eliminating Anthony's threat, Roman had thrust a knife into his enemy's neck instead. Was Roman originally someone like this? No, he wasn't. Roman was originally a weak person. Despite being the eldest son of Dimitri, he had good reason for being ignored by others. However, just then, a rumor he had recently been hearing came to his mind. Roman Dimitri subjugated the blood fawn by himself. Dimitri's fool was, in fact, a sleeping dragon with hidden power. That rumor, I thought it was bullshit. Knowing what kind of guy Roman was, Anthony didn't think he had the power to subdue blood fawn by himself. However, now, it was different. The way Roman looked at him and the pressure he exuded made Anthony's mouth dry. It eventually forced him to correct his assessment of Roman. "I'm sure of it. Roman has changed. The person known as Dimitri's fool was no longer there." The silence went on for quite some time. And at the look of Anthony Barco in trouble, Roman's eyes became cold. "You don't have a choice anyway. If you had been in a position to choose from in the first place, the cumbersome process of feeding me alcohol and making traps would not have been necessary." The current situation was simple. Despite Dimitri overtly denying Barco the goal he had hoped for, Barco never officially raised his voice of protest. "Why? It was because Dimitri's power was absolute. Anthony couldn't do anything while knowing what would happen if he was hostile to Dimitri. Roman had simply made him face reality. And Anthony Barco had no choice but to accept this reality, even though his self-esteem was hurt and his face blushed. Okay. If I forget this matter, you won't meddle with Barco and Lawrence's matters in the future, right? That's right. Then let's end this here. Anthony Barco saw a compromise and accepted that. However, even while seeing Anthony Barco bowing his head, Roman hid his true intentions. If I am to live as Roman Dimitri and have a peaceful future, I must destroy the Barcos, who threatened me. It was obvious now that the Barcos were enemies who would stand against Roman. And Roman was gracious to his people, but he showed no mercy to his enemies. The situation wasn't much different right now. The reason he offered Anthony Barco a temporary peace was not because he wanted peace for himself but because he knew there was no reason for Dimitri to bleed. There is no need for Dimitri to be the ones to oppose Barco. When Barco and Lawrence go to war, clawing at each other's throats in a desperate bid for survival, I will strike Barco and become the final nail in their coffin. Until reaching the peak of the demonic cult, Baek Jung-hyuk had many experiences of being threatened by women and also defeated his enemies with the same strategy. Showing an angry face and asking to fight means you're a fool who is ready to cut off your own head. Sometimes, you need to wear a mask, sometimes, you need to do what they don't expect you to. Ironically, because Roman recognized the Barcos as an enemy, he offered Anthony Barco a brief moment of peace. I'm thirsty. Roman grabbed the glass. Then, while looking at Anthony Barco, who could not lift his face due to his shattered pride, he drank. Gulp. His throat was parched. After drinking water, Roman left the private room. Now that he had learned the veiled truth, he had no reason to stay at the banquet anymore. I'm going to be a lot busier in the future. Indeed, there was a lot of work for him to do. After half a year, he had to perform his national defense duties, but before that, he was thinking of resolving his grudge against the Barcos by himself. He had no intention of using the power of the Dimitri family. In the first place, this problem had originated because of Roman, and it was necessary for him to rely on his own abilities to see how much he would be capable of in the future as well. How timely. Roman had recently been granted some authority from his father. My father gave me the authority to recruit a regiment of troops. I have to use that to create my own army. Roman had started a new life. He didn't yet have a clear goal of what to do, but there was one thing that Roman could be sure of, that he should rule. That was the life the heavenly demon needed to live. As he couldn't live a normal life, Roman knew that from now on, he had to prepare and complete his goals one by one. The war between Lawrence and Barco would be an excellent stage to gain experience, and furthermore, Roman would also use his time serving in the national defense as a stepping stone for growth. On his way out, many nobles spoke to him. Roman had quickly become the main character of the banquet, and when he said he was leaving, certain nobles were truly sad about it. However, just then, as he was greeting others and leaving the banquet, Roman suddenly heard a loud noise. Kevin? The cause of the noise, at the center of it was Kevin, surrounded by a group of knights. He was now an escort. He was someone who needed to protect his liege. Kevin, who followed Roman to the banquet, could hardly hide his excitement. I became the escort of a nobleman. And it isn't for any ordinary nobleman either. I became the escort of Roman Dimitri. With the fact that he had become an escort for someone he admired, Kevin wanted to do his job better than ever before. Naturally, he got greedy and asked Hans for a suit of armor. Then, he came out wearing a nice armor that barely fit him, and put on a helmet that didn't fit his head and showed a serious expression. Roman Dimitri's escort, Kevin, following Chris' advice to be careful with his words and actions, he tried his best to make himself look like the right person for the role. However, the perspective of others was different. No matter how hard Kevin tried, he couldn't help but look like a boy in his mid-teens. Who is he? I heard he's Roman Dimitri's escort. Pfft, stop joking. I've heard rumors that Roman Dmitri is the eldest son who is abandoned by Dmitri, but why is his escort a young kid who can't even wield a sword? That's Dmitri's level, I guess? In front of the banquet's door, in a situation where each noble's escorts guarded their positions, the knights engraved with Barco's pattern were mocking Kevin. Nevertheless, Kevin tried to stay calm and listen. However, at the sight of them not lowering their voices at all, Kevin blushed in anger. "Hold it in." It was Chris who said that. Of course, he was also listening to the knights, but he knew it was not good to argue with the knights of Barco. They are knights of the Barco family. If we react hastily in a situation where we don't know what kind of relationship the young master has with the Barco family, then he may get in trouble because of us. I already told you before we left for the banquet, we are Dmitri's face, and our Lord's reputation depends on our words and actions. So, no matter what they say, keep your composure and show your dignity as an escort. I understand. He nodded his head. He knew he would be disrespected. However, that was nothing unusual for him. Instead, it was normal for Kevin, who lived in a slum, so he tried to ignore the gossip of the knights. However, as time went on, it got progressively worse. They approached Kevin and looked at him. Wow. How could someone seriously think of bringing a kid like this as an escort? Look at this. The helmet doesn't even fit properly. What an escort. He seems to have picked up a matching suit of armor from the smithy, but still, he's deficient. I guess that's why your lord is called Dmitri's fool. Kevin raised his eyes. He had tolerated them swearing at him, however, the moment they mentioned Dmitri's fool and disrespected his lord, he retorted, "Watch your mouth." What? Young Master Roman isn't someone who is going to listen to that. So, be careful now. This bastard. The knight's expression suddenly became harsh. Barco and Dmitri, the relationship between the two families was strained due to Lawrence. Moreover, since Anthony Barco usually ignored Roman Dmitri, his knights did not feel the need to treat the people of the Dmitri family well. Their background was their strength. Even so, a knight who was incensed by Kevin swung his large hand toward the young Dmitri knight's face. Slap. Say that again, you bastard. Kevin's head turned. Seeing blood gushing from Kevin's face, Chris put his hand on his sword. However, he couldn't unsheath it. Of course, it was right to defend Kevin, but he was worried that his liege would be the one who would need to take responsibility for their actions. And Kevin understood that. In the ghetto, he was taught to pay back for what he suffered, but the moment his eyes met Chris, he suppressed his anger. I am the young master's sword. Roman's escort and his sword, having decided to become a useful person to Roman, Kevin turned his gaze away from the knights with a stiff face. It was him expressing he didn't want to deal with them anymore. Seeing that, the knights of Barco spoke angrily, "Come on, let's see how long you can keep your pride." Once again, the knight raised his arm. And, the moment he was about to slap Kevin's cheek. Slap. A satisfying sound rang out. Surprisingly, it wasn't Kevin who was slapped. Roman, who had suddenly appeared at the scene, had slapped the hell out of Barco's knight. Chapter 27. What happened at the banquet? Part 5. Barco's knight, Benson, could not accept reality even after feeling the tingling shock on his cheek. Did I just get slapped across the face? His cheek was hurting. As an escort of the Barco family, who had a huge reputation in the surrounding area, it wasn't the pain that he could not accept, it was the act of being slapped. He confirmed the other person's face, Roman Dmitri. He understood why Roman Dmitri hit him, but due to his reputation as a fool, Benson could not contain his wrath. How dare this bast, cook? Slap. Once again, his head spun. Embarrassed, Benson grabbed his cheek and tried to stop Roman, but Roman's hand slapped his cheek again. Slap. 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 Once, twice, and even thrice, each time Roman attacked him, Benson couldn't even counter his slaps. Nevertheless, Roman did not stop hitting Benson's face even when his face had not returned to its original position, and Benson, who was initially both confident and angry at Roman, withdrew. His head was spinning as if he had rolled down from a cliff. Consecutively, the pain outweighed his poor self-esteem, and while staggering, Benson waved his arms and begged earnestly. Please. His cheek was hurting. It was hurting so much one would think someone had poured molten lava over it. Although he had lived a life accustomed to suffering, Roman's touch had the power to make people powerless. At that moment, he understood he had made a huge mistake. Regardless, Roman neither gave him a chance to apologize nor did he allow him to make any excuses. Even though aristocrats from the banquet began to gather while seeing the commotion outside, he slapped Benson's face countless times with a cold expression. Benson's blood splashed on the floor, and even his teeth came out. He was staggering even while he was on his knees, and before he knew it, he was holding on to Roman's legs. Clearly, the situation had gotten dire. Belatedly, Kevin and Chris tried to stop him. "Young master. This is enough punishment, my liege. The opponent is Barco's knight. Even considering your relationship with them, it isn't good to go this far." They were correct. However, even though they uttered advice, Roman glanced at them with a blood-splattered face and said, "I will be the one to decide the standard of sufficient punishment. Chris, Kevin, what kind of punishment do you think is appropriate for a knight who badmouths me, Dimitri's eldest son? Even if this guy dies by my hands today, it's only the price he needs to pay for the words he uttered. Even with that, I won't be going beyond any boundaries." Roman, right now, he wasn't a benevolent lord. Benson had crossed the line set by Roman, resulting in a little bit of the cruelty of the heavenly demon being revealed to others. Good sociability and kindness towards his subordinates, they were the necessary elements to maintain power. However, in the end, there are certain things that must also be done in order to rule well and maintain one's throne. One such thing was punishing miscreants to set an example for others. There was a clear standard of punishment. In front of everyone, Roman was showing how he would deal with those who crossed the line. And once again, he pulled his hand back to slap Benson. However, at the moment he grabbed his head and was about to slap him. "What the hell is this?" Anthony Barco appeared. He couldn't believe it. Roman Dimitri dared to punish the Barco family's knights in front of everyone even though it was Barco's banquet. Certainly, it was beyond his authority. And, with a face so blisteringly red as if it would explode at any given moment, Anthony Barco shouted, "Roman! Even though you are the eldest son of the Dimitri family, it is absolutely unacceptable to meddle with the Barco family's knights. So, stop that right now and apologize for your behavior." The recent conversation in the private room, he had totally forgotten about it. Back then, he bowed his head for peace and mutual interest, but being openly ignored in front of everyone was something he could not tolerate. Alternately looking at Anthony and Roman, a look of interest appeared on the faces of the nobles who were holding their breath. Now, Anthony Barco put even more strength into his voice. He had thought Roman had obviously crossed the line. Thus, he truly deserved his anger. However, why should I apologize? Roman was not agitated even a little bit. Still holding Benson's head, he said coldly while looking at Anthony Barco, "As I was leaving the banquet, I heard a Barco knight badmouthing me. Moreover, as he continued badmouthing me, he even made demeaning remarks to the Dimitri family. And in front of me, he dared to touch the face of someone from Dimitri. Anthony Barco, do you still think what I did was wrong? Even so, this has crossed the line." Line, huh? Pfft. Anthony, of course, also knew that this was Benson's responsibility. Still, the reason he could not back down was not because he wanted to protect Benson but because of the gazes of the people around him. He was desperately asking Roman to back down just once. Nevertheless, despite Anthony Barco's gaze asking to save face, Roman did not follow his intentions in the slightest. "Did you already forget what I said back in the private room? I don't know how the relationship between the two of us, and furthermore, the relationship between our families, will change due to my personal resentment. From now on, you should be clear about your attitude towards me, Anthony. Will we continue to maintain our current relationship, or will we devour each other every time we meet? My patience is not as great as you think. So, decide your attitude right now. People who were gathered there were perplexed. Initially, they had thought that it was a simple dispute, but they didn't know that it would turn into a problem that would bring up the relationship between their families. Moreover, the current situation was also Roman's intention. During his lifetime, the original Roman Dmitri had lived like an idiot who was not treated properly outside, even though the Dmitri family was the powerhouse of the northeast region of Cairo. It couldn't even be said that it was anybody else's fault. Truthfully, it was Roman Dmitri's fault for not taking advantage of his own strengths, and the current Roman wanted to rectify that fact as he began his new life. My name is Roman Dmitri. The eldest son of the Dmitri family, Roman Dmitri. Even though he was up against Barco, he showed everyone that he was a man who could utter such rude remarks to them. Benson, he was just an excuse. From the moment Roman entered Barco's banquet, he was looking for an opportunity to prove his worth even after he had won the favor of the surrounding nobles through conversation. That was his intention when he had accepted to go to the banquet. And, in a situation that arose from his opponent's mistakes, Roman chuckled and attacked Benson like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. His sharp white teeth were exposed to Benson. Seeing Roman's predator-like attitude, Anthony Barco could not hide his embarrassment. Damn it. Roman's enmity and the gazes around him, in his heart, he wanted to fight. However, he knew that if he did, his mistake could not be undone through any means. After experiencing it firsthand in the private room, he could not deny that Roman had changed, and he could not risk their family relations being disrupted due to Roman's personal resentment. What if that happens? One-sidedly, it is definitely Barco's loss. With a bit of patience and perseverance, he could get his hands on Lawrence's fertile lands and Flora Lawrence. Thus, he didn't think it was necessary to upset Dmitri and ruin his grand plans. Little by little, Anthony Barco fell into self-rationalization. Nevertheless, he struggled to ignore the gazes around him, thinking that he had no choice but to choose one option. Eventually, he said, thinking about it, "You are correct. If Dimitri's knight had insulted me in front of others and touched a member of the Barco family, I would have punished him similarly. This is absolutely our fault." He took a step back. After bending his pride, he struggled to add meaningless excuses, saying he would have punished him similarly if he had been in the same situation. And that was the end of it. Roman smiled and pulled Benson's head forward. "You think so?" And when Benson's eyes, tinged with fear, turned to him, Roman forced his head to the floor and said, "Show some respect." At those words, Benson squeezed his eyes shut. In the end, he was carried away on a stretcher. He was beaten so severely that his face had become bloody, and fragments of his teeth were left where he initially was, swimming in blood. With that, Roman's aim of coming to the banquet had been achieved. He wiped the blood off his hands with his handkerchief and left the party with Chris and Kevin. On the way back to Dmitri, Kevin, who was silently following Roman, said with a face as if he had committed treason, "Sorry. Because of me, my liege had to suffer embarrassment." He truly felt miserable. If only he had been a knight like Chris. Barco's knights would not have dared to argue with him, and Roman would not have been involved in useless things. Chris also added, "I'm sorry as well. Even while seeing Kevin being beaten, and them insulting Dmitri, I did not respond. If I am to be punished for this, I will accept that punishment and never allow this to happen again in the future." Chris had power. Still, he remained calm for Roman. If he had known that Roman would be angry enough to be hostile to Barco, he would have drawn his sword and fought from the beginning. Tap. Roman stopped walking. Then, he turned to his men and spoke calmly, "You guys made the best choice for me. It must have been difficult to be patient, but thank you for being calm. Today, neither of them was responsible. From anyone's perspective, the Barco family had power, and Roman Dmitri had no power or authority to treat them badly. If Roman was unprepared and had an argument with the Barco family, he might have faced trouble in front of everyone. Chris and Kevin knew that. They acknowledged Roman's strength, but his position as Dimitri's successor and authority was unstable, so his situation could have taken a turn for the worse if they had taken any different actions. However, that didn't mean their response was perfect either. Being mistreated, of course, leads to anger. Your choice did avoid the worst outcome, but it isn't the choice I wanted you to make. In the future, remember how to behave when someone spits in your face. If you do that, nothing like today will ever happen again. At least in the region of Northeast and the Kingdom of Cairo, there will be no one who will dare to disrespect the Dmitri family. While living at the bottom of the cave in his original life, Baek Jin-hyuk was powerless. So, he used his tools and smashed everyone's boss's head with a stone, making him the new king of the 12 children of the heavenly demon. However, the situation right now was different from back then. You can do anything when you don't have power, but when you take on power, you risk the life of your comrades as well. And for that, I knew what actions to take at what time. When it was not the right time, he smiled, and when the time was right, even if others judged him to be reckless, he cut off his opponent's head without hesitation. In that process, he crossed numerous life or death situations. Chris and Kevin were trying to act in his best interests, but if they had known what actions to take at what time, they wouldn't have stood still today. Just like the situation with the Barco family and even the Blood Fong, if Dimitri's strength was accurately grasped, even if they crossed the line, there would be no problem. And even if it is something you have to endure, keep your opponent's face clearly in your eyes. There is a difference between simply being patient and bowing helplessly. Your eyes must not lose the intent to crush your opponent when the time is right. I'm not the type of person who can tolerate someone being higher than me. You will have to get used to it. If you want to follow me, you need to place everyone else in this world under your feet. At that moment, Chris and Kevin thought, Roman Dmitri is a man who will lead a reigning life. And in order to become a person suitable for him, they must strive not to remain in the realm of everyone else's common sense and thoughts. Roman walked ahead, Chris and Kevin followed him. Looking at Roman's reliable back, the two men's footsteps were more firm, and they felt a stronger trust in him than they had ever felt. The heavenly demon, the power that dominated all of Murim was now, little by little, taking shape here in the Kingdom of Cairo.